Normandy, D-Day, the Omaha assault. They told us we were part of something bigger. A turning point. The kind of thing you read about in history books. But in that moment, huddled in the belly of a rocking Higgins boat, all I knew was that my stomach was churning harder than the sea. Salt water mixed with diesel fumes, and the thudding heartbeat of the engine wasn't nearly as loud as the silence between the men around me. Guys I'd trained with for months, laughed with, shared smokes and stories with. Some of them I didn't even know their real names, just nicknames that stuck. Philly Red Beans Pastor. None of that mattered now. All that mattered was what waited for us on the other side of that ramp. I was Private Michael Donovan, one of the big red one, 1st Infantry Division. My boots had touched British soil just weeks before, but now they were about to hit hell. June 6, 1944. The date was etched into every muscle in my body, even before the bullets started flying. It was still early, barely light, when the order came to stand by. I remember my hands. They were shaking, but steady. Weird thing, really. Shaking from cold and fear, but steady on my rifle. Like muscle memory took over where courage gave out. That's when the first shells started landing. The ocean exploded around us. One landing craft just disappeared, gone. Screams, splinters, then nothing but a black patch of seafoam where it used to be. That's when it hit me, this was real. Not an exercise. Not another drill. Real. Then the ramp dropped. It felt like the world tilted forward. Time stretched. The air was suddenly full of metal and fire. German machine guns, MG-42s, spat bullets faster than I thought possible. They were perched on the bluffs, dug into those concrete bunkers we'd seen in blurry recon photos. Now they were gods of death, raining hell. Men went down before they even got out of the boat. Philly was in front of me. He caught it right through the neck. He fell back into me, blood pouring like someone had turned on a faucet. I pushed past him. I had to, either forward or die where I stood. The water was waist deep, colder than ice. Bullets tore into it, leaving white geysers inches from my legs. I saw Beans go under. Never came back up. I don't know if he tripped or was hit, but just like that, gone. I forced myself forward, rifle held high above the waves, boots dragging through the surf like cement blocks. The beach wasn't sand, not really. It was a mix of wet gravel, steel tank traps, and twisted bodies. The smell hit me before the wind carried it. Cordite, seaweed, blood. That coppery sting that stays in your nose for hours after. I remember thinking, this isn't how it was supposed to be. The movies never showed this part. They never showed how some guys screamed for their mothers, or how some didn't scream at all. A mortar hit nearby. My ears rang like church bells. Everything muted for a second, like someone pressed pause on the carnage. Then sound rushed back in with the weight of 1,000 hammers. That's when I saw him. Captain Brooks, standing tall behind a chunk of Czech hedgehog, waving us forward. I could barely hear his voice, but I read his lips. Push, push, God damn it. Just before a burst took him down. He folded in half like a rag doll, then didn't move. We reached the first line of tank obstacles. Some guys crawled behind him, others were cut down before they could. I dropped behind a jagged X of rusted metal, chest heaving, lungs burning. Around me, men regrouped. What was left of us? Maybe 10, maybe fewer. Time was weird on that beach. Seconds felt like hours. Minutes didn't exist. I glanced up, the bluffs loomed ahead. Barbed wire, pillboxes, smoke trails from German mortars streaking the sky. And somewhere beyond all that, the hedgerows of Normandy. The villages we were supposed to liberate. The people counting on us. And in that moment, something strange settled in. Not fear. Not bravery. Something in between. Like a quiet voice in the back of my mind whispering, "You're still alive. Keep moving." Then I heard it. Distant thrum. Not gunfire. Not artillery. A hum. Constant. Low. Like a heartbeat in the earth itself. It pulsed beneath the sand. I looked at the guy beside me, a kid named Harris from Kansas. He heard it too. I could tell by the way his head tilted, just slightly. Neither of us said a word. We just stared at each other, eyes wide. The hum kept coming. And that was when I knew this day wasn't just about who lived or died. Something else was at play. Something bigger than orders or maps. I didn't know what it was, not yet. But I knew one thing for damn sure. The beach wasn't finished with us. I pushed off the rusted steel of the tank trap and began to crawl, dragging my belly across the gravel like some kind of dying animal, half submerged in seawater and fear. Every inch forward felt like a victory against death. The tide had begun to recede slightly, exposing more of the beach, revealing bodies scattered in unnatural shapes, limbs bent the wrong way, helmets cracked open like dropped eggs. Somewhere ahead, someone had jammed a Bangalore torpedo under the wire. I could see the long metal tube, just barely visible through the haze of smoke and sand kicked up by nearby impacts. A corporal I didn't recognize was shouting something, maybe calling for a fuse, maybe praying. It all blurred together into one long scream of metal and madness. I kept moving, not thinking, just following instinct, the way you do when everything you know about the world falls away, and the only truth is forward motion. Behind me, the sea still churned with landing craft. More men arriving, more lives poured into the meat grinder. I remember thinking how strange it was that this massive, meticulously planned operation, this grand assault to liberate Europe, came down to tiny moments, like whether I put my hand down an inch to the left or right and whether that spot happened to hold a piece of shrapnel hot enough to end me. I moved like a ghost through the chaos, pressing behind a half-buried Sherman tank that had never made it off the beach. Its turret twisted, hatch open, crew probably still inside. The heat of the metal singed my uniform as I leaned against it, and I could feel the thrum again, not just under my feet now, but in my chest. A pulsing rhythm that didn't match the gunfire or explosions, something separate, older maybe. It was the kind of thing you don't notice with your ears, but with something deeper, bones or blood or memory. Around me, the survivors of our wave, or what was left of it, were rallying. A sergeant with a radio strapped to his back was frantically adjusting knobs, his voice cracking as he tried to reach someone, anyone, for fire support. He was using the beach name, Dog Green, repeating it like a mantra, like maybe if he said it enough times it would turn into something safer. I could see past him up the bluff now, smoke curling from the pillboxes, dirt spilling down as explosions cratered the hillside. German machine gun nests were still active, cutting down anyone who dared break cover, and yet somehow, men were still advancing, crawling, running, dragging the wounded behind them, inch by goddamn inch. No one told them to. No one had to. You either moved or you died. I slid in next to a guy I'd seen before but never talked to. Big farm boy type, red-faced and sweating under his helmet, eyes wide like a spooked horse. He was fumbling with a flamethrower unit, hands shaking so badly I thought he'd drop it. I helped him with the hose, and for a second our eyes met. He didn't thank me. He didn't have to. We both knew we were depending on each other, even if neither of us would be around by nightfall. He said one word, barely audible. Ready? I nodded, and he stepped out from behind the tank, advancing toward the wire. I turned my gaze away just as the bunkers opened up again. I heard the wet thud of impact, felt the spray of something hot on my face. When I looked back, he was gone. The tank was smoking now. I couldn't tell if it was fire or steam or something worse, but I knew I had to move. I lost track of time. Was it 20 minutes since the ramp dropped? An hour? No way to know. But something in the air had shifted. The sound of our artillery, the naval guns, was heavier now, walking their way up the bluff. The shelling was getting closer to the German lines. Some of the fire slackened. That was our chance. Someone started yelling. A lieutenant, maybe. He was limping, arm hanging at an angle no arm should. He motioned us forward. Somehow, from that wreckage of men and noise and steel, a dozen of us surged ahead, crawling at first, then staggering to our feet. We dashed across open sand like damned fools. The wire was breached in places, the torpedoes had done their work, and through the gaps we sprinted into the base of the bluff, where rough earth gave just enough cover to breathe. I fell behind a chunk of blasted concrete, maybe part of a seawall or old fortification, and only then did I realize I'd been hit. Not bad. Shrapnel maybe in my side, just a burning sting and warmth under my jacket. Didn't matter. I was still breathing. That's when I saw it, Harris again. He'd made it too. He was crouched behind a log, grinning like a madman, face smeared with sand and blood. I pointed toward the top of the bluff. He nodded, and without saying a word, we started climbing. The incline was steep, dirt loose under our boots, and every step felt like climbing out of a grave. Above us, I could hear the gunfire slowing, shifting. Some of our boys must have flanked around, come up from the sides. Grenades are going off now, close. Screams in German. The tide was turning, literally and metaphorically. And yet, that hum, that low, bone-deep resonance, was still there. Maybe it was just adrenaline. Maybe it was the sound of death circling, waiting for its turn. Or maybe it was something stranger, a whisper carried by the dead of Normandy, murmuring through the sand. We crested the bluff together, Harris and I, and for a moment, everything went silent. No gunfire, no shouting. Just wind and sky and the battered ruins of enemy fortifications. Smoke drifted from a half-destroyed pillbox. A soldier staggered from the shadows, arms raised, a white cloth clutched in trembling fingers. He was barely more than a boy. Probably never fired his rifle. His eyes met mine, and he froze, mouth working like he wanted to say something. But before I could lower my weapon, a shot rang out behind me, and he fell. I turned to see who fired, but there was no one. Just empty air. Harris wasn't there anymore. And that hum? It was louder than ever. I stood at the edge of the bluff, heart pounding, lungs straining against the weight of exhaustion, confusion clouding my mind more than the acrid smoke hanging in the air. The boy who tried to surrender lay crumpled in the dirt, his arms still stretched out, the white scrap of cloth fluttering weakly in the breeze like a final breath leaving his body. I hadn't pulled the trigger. I knew that with the kind of certainty that lives in your bones. But I was the only one standing there, and there were no footsteps behind me, no voice, no presence that could explain the echoing crack of a rifle I never saw. Just the ringing in my ears, the sudden silence that felt too deliberate, too cold. Harris, who'd been just a few feet away moments before, had vanished like mist in the morning sun. No blood trail, no gear dropped, no sign he'd ever been there at all. I called his name, softly at first, then louder, my voice bouncing off the stone and tangled wire like it didn't belong to me anymore. The hum was constant now, not deafening, not overwhelming, just there, just present, like a second pulse under my skin. I thought for a fleeting second that maybe this was what it meant to lose your mind in combat, not screaming or breaking down, but drifting into this odd suspended state where reality bends and reshapes itself, where what's gone feels just out of reach, like something you might find again if you just looked in the right direction. I couldn't focus on it too long. There were still enemy soldiers around, some retreating, some pinned down in what was left of their positions. Our own men were filtering up from the beach now, bloody, battered, but determined, climbing through the smoke and ruin, taking ground that minutes ago had belonged to death. I moved forward through the trenches cut into the hillside, the kind built fast and hard, with wooden beams and sandbags and cold, damp stone that reeked of mold and oil. I stepped over spent shells and bodies, German, American, sometimes impossible to tell which was which under the mud and burns. There were moments where the fighting surged again, sharp and sudden, like a dying flame flaring back to life. A burst of gunfire here, the sudden scream of a wounded man there. But the worst of it, the machine guns, the mortars, the complete and merciless slaughter that had passed. Now came the part they never tell you about. The picking through the aftermath. The gathering of the lost. At one turn, I found a medic crouched over a soldier who couldn't have been more than 19, his hands pressed into the boy's gut like he could somehow hold in the life spilling out. The medic was muttering words I couldn't hear, just repeating them over and over, eyes wide and frantic. I wanted to help, wanted to do something, anything, but the look in his eyes told me he was past hearing, lost in a world of desperation and fading hope. I left them behind and kept going. Not out of cruelty, not out of fear, but because part of me knew I had to. There were others ahead, more lives hanging in the balance, more steps to take. And beneath it all, that hum, steady, low, familiar now, like something that had always been there, only waiting for the right moment to rise. I climbed through the last stretch of trench and emerged onto a patch of flattened grass and broken stone that might have once been a command post. There were maps still pinned to a wooden board, corners flapping in the wind, marked with lines and circles and names of towns I couldn't pronounce. Beyond that, the fields stretched toward the interior, rolling green hills dotted with hedgerows and the smoke columns of a burning France. That's where we were headed next. Inland, towards St. Mir-Église, toward every brutal mile of occupied Europe. But I didn't move yet. Something in me hesitated. I stood there alone, while the rest of the platoon filtered past, eyes hollow, uniforms torn, blood-streaked, and silent. I watched them go, one by one, like ghosts ascending a hill I hadn't yet found the strength to climb. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it. Just a flicker of movement where there shouldn't be any. Between the remains of a stone wall and a collapsed radio tower, a shadow ducked low and quick. I raised my rifle, heart hammering, but no shot came. No voice. Just the sound of wind and that ever-present hum. I followed the path carefully, weapon ready, eyes scanning for any sign of life, or whatever else it might have been. The ground crunched under my boots, broken glass and shell casings marking every step. Then I saw him, Harris. Or at least, someone who looked exactly like him. He was standing by an old well, his back to me, helmet off, blonde hair tousled by the breeze. He wasn't wounded. He didn't look scared. Just calm, still. As if the battle had never happened. As if the screams and explosions and fire were a dream he'd woken from hours ago. I called his name again, quietly this time, not sure I wanted him to turn around. He did, slowly. And when he faced me, I felt my breath catch. It was him. But his eyes, they were different. Too clear. Too still. Like he wasn't seeing me. Not really. Like he was looking through me, or maybe into something far beyond me. He didn't smile. Didn't speak. He just raised one hand, a slow, deliberate motion, and pointed toward the east, toward the rising sun. Then he vanished. Just like that. No flash, no sound. One blink, and he was gone. The well stood empty. The field was still. I stood there for a long time. I didn't try to make sense of it. Not then. Maybe not ever. War does strange things to a man's mind. It unravels the world you thought you knew and stitches together something new from the pieces left behind. I turned back toward the road and started walking. My unit was already far ahead. The liberation of France had begun. I was still alive. I still had a job to do. But even now, all these years later, I can still hear it, that low hum beneath everything. It never left me. And I still wonder, was Harris ever really there on the bluff? Or was he always waiting out here, just beyond the edge of what we understand? The road inland was no road at all, not in the way you'd picture one from back home in Kansas or Ohio or any of the other places we all used to name when passing time in the barracks. Just a narrow stretch of beaten earth flanked by hedgerows that had stood for centuries, gnarled and overgrown, shaped by generations of wind and war and quiet farming long before tanks ever rolled across them. The smell of smoke and churned up soil followed us like a shadow, mixing with the sweet rot of spring blossoms and the harsher, coppery tang that only blood and cordite could produce. We were a loose column now, men strung out in uneven lines, moving slowly and methodically, with weapons raised and eyes flicking in every direction, not because we were following orders, but because silence made you suspicious and alive things had a habit of becoming dead without a moment's warning. There were no cheers from the countryside, no flowers thrown at our feet, no smiling French villagers welcoming their liberators. Not yet, not here. What there was instead was a silence so complete it pressed on the chest, made you wonder if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting to see if we would pass through like a storm or vanish like the hundreds before us who'd never made it past the sand. Occasionally, we'd pass a farmhouse, half-burned, shuttered, abandoned, chickens pecking nervously in the dirt, a dog barking behind a door that would never open. And sometimes, just sometimes, you'd see a curtain twitch, a child's face barely visible through a crack, vanishing as quickly as it appeared. France was watching us, but it wasn't ready to believe just yet. The squad leader, a quiet guy named Kessler who always looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, had us pause at a crossroads, little more than a muddy junction where the hedgerows split. He raised a fist, and we dropped low, rifles sweeping across the fields, eyes squinting through the mid-morning haze. There was a farmhouse up ahead, stone, slate roof, a lean-to barn half-collapsed beside it. Smoke drifted lazily from the chimney, too neat, too controlled. Either someone was home, or someone wanted it to look that way. We waited. Nothing moved. No birds took flight. No cattle wandered into view. I remember thinking how unnatural the quiet had become, not peaceful, but expectant, like something unseen was balancing on the edge of decision. Kessler motioned for two of us to flank left. I was one of them, and we crept along the hedgerow, using the brush for cover, boots sinking into the soft earth, sweat trickling down my spine in cold lines despite the chill in the air. The other guy was named Romero, New York accent thick as molasses, funny bastard even under fire, and always smoking even when it made no sense to. But not today. He was silent, focused, rifle tight to his shoulder, eyes scanning that farmhouse like he could will the walls into transparency. We got close enough to hear the crackle of the fire inside, the occasional creak of old wood, and something else. Whispering. Not German. Not English either. Just soft, rhythmic, almost melodic, like someone reciting lines from a play or muttering a bedtime story. It was strange, but not frightening, at least not at first. People did all sorts of things under stress. You hear soldiers talk to themselves, to their rifles, to ghosts and God and everything in between. But there was something about this sound, the cadence of it, that didn't sit right. It was too measured, too calm, like the speaker wasn't afraid at all, like they were expecting us. Romero and I looked at each other. He raised a brow, I nodded. We moved to the door. It wasn't locked. I pushed it open with the barrel of my rifle, slow and steady. Every nerve in my body braced for the sudden pop of gunfire, the thud of a grenade, the kind of moment that burns itself into your memory forever. But what I saw stopped me cold. The room was empty. No furniture, no inhabitants, just a single metal chair in the center of the stone floor, and on it a U.S. Army helmet. Blood dried on the rim. Etched into the floor beneath it, drawn in dark lines like something scorched or carved with a bayonet, was a crude symbol I didn't recognize. Not a swastika, not any Allied marking, just a circle intersected by a jagged line, broken down the middle. And the hum, the one I'd been feeling since Omaha, was back again, stronger here, so much that the air itself felt thicker, like it pushed against your skin. Romero stepped in behind me, muttered a low, "What the hell?" and pointed to the corner. I turned and saw a bundle of letters, folded and stained, tucked neatly beneath the helmet. I reached out, hesitated. They were addressed to a Private Richard Harris, same name, same handwriting I recognized from the footlocker back on the ship. Same Harris who disappeared on the bluff, pointed to the sun, and vanished. But the postmark was wrong. These letters were dated May of 1943, a full year before D-Day. That made no sense. None of this did. I picked them up, hands trembling now, and opened the top envelope. Inside was a single sheet, yellowed and torn. No salutation, no signature. Just one line, scrawled in the same steady hand I'd seen on briefing reports, mailroom tags, everything Harris had ever touched. We've done this before. We'll do it again. Not all battles are new. Behind me, Romero shifted. I turned to speak, to ask if he saw the same thing I did, but he was already walking out, shaking his head, muttering something about ghosts and déjà vu. I followed, holding the letter like it might answer something, like it might explain what I'd felt since the moment that ramp dropped, that this war, this landing, this entire bloody mess wasn't the first time I'd lived it, and wouldn't be the last. We rejoined the column without a word. The others were already moving again, pushing toward the next village, toward the next fight. I folded the letter, tucked it into my jacket, and walked on. And as I did, I could feel it again, that low, insistent hum, not behind me anymore, not beneath me, but within. Somewhere ahead, I knew we'd reach the end of this road. But not yet. Not yet. The road that led inland from Omaha Beach stretched not just through the broken terrain of Normandy, but through the marrow of memory, where the real bled into the unreal, and the boundaries between what was and what felt true dissolved like fog beneath morning sun. We marched forward, or maybe we drifted, a line of men who had seen the inside of death and walked back out again, not unchanged but somehow unfinished. The sky above us was that pale, high blue you only get in spring, when the warmth is coming back but hasn't quite settled in, and somewhere above that, the distant, rhythmic drone of Allied planes heading deeper into occupied France. That sound, like a heartbeat made of metal and promise, filled the silence between words we no longer knew how to say. For the rest of that day, the land spoke more than any of us did. A field with scorched craters like old scars. A church with its steeple cracked in half, the bell still hanging silently like a throat tube choked to call out. A line of boots abandoned in the mud, the kind we all wore, size 11, laces still tied. I remember walking past a downed glider stuck nose first in a copse of trees, its wings twisted and torn like paper, and thinking about the men who flew it, whether they had time to understand what had gone wrong, whether they looked at one another in that final second and accepted the weight of silence. But most of all, I remember the growing feeling that we weren't alone, even when the map said we were. The kind of feeling that lives just past the edge of understanding. Not fear, not exactly, more like recognition. As if we were not the first to pass this way. As if someone or something had been waiting. That night, we made camp in a field just beyond a shattered village whose name I never caught. The locals were gone, or hiding, or worse. Our tents were barely more than canvas stretched between trees, and sleep came like a thief, stealing time in fragments, interrupted by distant gunfire, nervous shifting, or dreams that felt too real. I woke at some point before dawn, heart hammering, throat dry, the image of that strange symbol, the circle with the jagged line, burned behind my eyes. I sat up, wiped sweat from my face, and for a moment I thought I saw Harris again, standing at the edge of the tree line, half lit by moonlight, just watching. Not moving, not waving, just there. I blinked and he was gone. Maybe that's when I knew I'd never really left Omaha. Not entirely. The final push toward can begin at first light, under a sky smeared with smoke and morning gold. We were different now. The men beside me had stopped asking, what if, and started asking, how far? The boy who'd vomited on the Higgins boat now carried a Browning like it had grown out of his shoulder. Kessler spoke in half sentences, not because he couldn't find the words, but because the words were no longer necessary. The war was speaking for us all. And yet, under that noise, under the rumble of tanks, the rasp of boots in the dirt, the distant crump of artillery, that same hum remained. Not louder, not softer, just present. Like breath, like truth. It was in the woods near Bretteville where everything came full circle. We'd been clearing a small pocket of resistance, a farmhouse again. Though this one was gutted, flames having licked every surface, roof caved in, corpses too burned to identify, uniforms melted into flesh. There was nothing tactical here, no logic, no advantage, just ruin. And in the cellar beneath it, hidden behind a false wall, we found what I can only call a shrine. Not to God, not to Hitler, but to something older. The same symbol carved deep into the floor, into the walls, even into the ceiling beams. Crude drawings, men in uniform caught in loops, marching forever in circles, faces hollowed out, eyes scratched black. And pinned to the far wall, still somehow clean, untouched by soot or ash, was a photo. A group of soldiers, American, smiling, and in the center, unmistakably, Harris. Only the date on the back said 1917, not 1944. Kessler ordered us out, said nothing to the brass, told the rest of the squad it was just Nazi superstition. If I saw it in his eyes, he knew it wasn't. I carried that photo in my pocket for the rest of the campaign. It wasn't fear that made me do it. It was understanding. Some stories don't live on paper. Some wars don't end when a shooting stops. Some men, some souls are not bound by time the way others are. Maybe Harris was one of them. Maybe we all are once we've seen too much. We took in. We pushed east. We kept moving, kept surviving, kept finding the same shadows in different rooms. The war ended. The parades came. The medals were pinned. And eventually I went home. But I never stopped hearing the hum. I heard it on the day I married and faint and steady behind the organ. I heard it the night my son was born, behind the soft cry and the sound of breath. I heard it at the funerals too. The ones who came back broken. The ones who never came back at all. And every June 6th, when the memory returns like the tide, I sit in my old chair and I close my eyes and I hear it again. Not just the sound, but what it means. We've done this before. We'll do it again. Not all battles are new. Some just wear different uniforms. And some never end at all.